the friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
Hi, my name's Morgan from Helena, Montana, and I support this smart and funny show and get exclusive podcasts at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast where we talk about true crime, pop culture, other podcasts, and this week...
a rerun.
Oh, really?
Yeah, look, we were supposed to take this week off because of the holiday, but just didn't feel right about not dropping something in the feed.
Oh, you're so nice.
So I went to, I guess we'll call these Crime Writers On Classics.
Ooh. You don't want to call them something like archives, make them sound dusty?
Oh, yeah.
Classics is better.
Yeah. So we're going back to March 2015.
Wow.
And we are going to be listening to our review of, I should say our discussion of, The Jinx and The Staircase.
Oh my God, we did that in one show?
Yeah, and there's also a news update from that time about cereal.
Wow.
And there's also a little bit of a thirst trap.
Really?
Where we hear you talking to somebody connected to the cereal case that you think is listening and is going to call you, and please keep doing that. And I'm guessing it's Rabia.
Oh, okay. So this is an old episode. This is back when we sounded earnest and didn't swear and all that stuff?
Yeah, we were using the serial music against probably their copyright. So we're going to take that out. And I got to say, there's no review. We didn't do thumbs up, thumbs down, or a grade. We just talked about this.
This is a rerun. So do I really have to listen to this?
No, you don't have to listen to this. Consider it a bonus. If you don't want to listen to this, that's fine. Thank you for listening to this much.
But download it anyway, because it helps us.
You've already downloaded it. It's in your phone. It's on your laptop. Go ahead.
And if you're just streaming it, take the extra step and download it anyway to help us out, please. All right, so should we give it a go?
Yeah.
All right.
And let's turn back time to the podcast known as Crime Writers on Serial.
With me in the studio today is my true crime co-author and real-life husband, Kevin Flynn. Hello again, Kevin.
Hi, Rebecca. Nice to see you after a couple of weeks.
I want to give you a special thanks for one thing, Kevin. The number of times this weekend when I cut you off in the middle of one of our debates and said, save it for the podcast. Thanks for your patience when I did that.
I'm ready to explode.
And joining us remotely today from the studio at the University of New Hampshire in Durham is former defense investigator, journalist, true crime author, and finally, premium cable subscriber, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello. Thank you for helping me overcome my Yankee frugality.
Also joining us from UNH is crime fiction author and resident contrarian, Toby Ball. Hey, Toby.
How are you?
I'm fine. So let's catch up a little bit on Serial. Back in February, we got a big announcement that Adnan had been granted an appeal based in large part on Asia McClain's new affidavit. Laura, I'm curious, what did you think when you heard that Adnan was getting this chance at an appeal?
I was optimistic. I was a little bit surprised that it took so long for the court system to recognize that there might have been an ineffective counsel, and I'll be curious to see what happens.
What about you, Toby? What did you think when you heard about the appeal potential?
I think it's interesting that it seems to come out of having Serial be done on Adnan, and it's sort of it seems like it's outside the normal system by which you would get an appeal. if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Everything we're talking about today, we're going to be sort of visiting like justice because of media, which is a really interesting, kind of idea. I don't know if it's new, but it's certainly something that's emerging right now. What do you think, Kevin?
Well, as Toby brings up, this is sort of a gray area because usually in a criminal case, new evidence is considered newly discovered evidence, not necessarily evidence that's been somewhat, had been presented to somebody and never came to light further on. So basically, there are three things that could happen with this appeal, okay? So we've got, again, this is, Adnan was granted leave to appeal. It's basically surrounding, as we said, ineffective counsel. Now, to bring everybody up to date, in case they haven't been following everything on the Googles, there are three possible outcomes. The judges could deny the appeal, which basically said that the Asia testimony wasn't germane, the defense was, effective.
That it doesn't matter that she wasn't contacted.
It doesn't matter, wouldn't have changed anything. The judges could accept the appeal and order a new trial, basically overturn the conviction. But if that happens, the state could appeal that decision, and it would go to the state Supreme Court in Maryland, so that would drag it out. And there's just sort of this middle ground where the judges could remand the case to the trial court for further fact-finding. So they basically would dig into more of the Asia McClain thing, then find out, come back, and decide based on the merits of that fact-finding whether they should decide the appeal. So one of those three things could happen. It's not like there's going to be some action right away.
Well, thank you. You're like our resident Nancy Grace today with your legal research. I appreciate it. Laura, I'm curious, what do you think the atmosphere around a new trial of Adnan Syed would be like? What would that look like for us, sort of here on the outside of the state of Maryland, just, serial listeners?
Well, I think it's not going to be as exciting as you might expect. Typically, appeal cases are argued before the judge or a panel of judges, and when you're asking for an appeal, so it wouldn't necessarily be as much of a bombshell courtroom drama as you might expect with the witnesses. But I certainly think that this would be much more widely covered in the media and get much more attention than it got the first time. And we would certainly know what was going on at all times in the case, because I certainly expect that all the media outlets would be there.
What do you think, Toby? Is this something that you would sort of watch as someone who listened to the podcast? And, I know that I think of the three of us sort of lean more toward, Adnan not necessarily being like the wrongly convicted innocent. You sort of have, I think, less of a shade of gray around it than we do. What do you think the trial would look like? Would you follow it? Would you be satisfied if, for example, he were acquitted or convicted? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I guess I don't have real strong feelings about what kind of outcome. I'm not as much of a court follower as the three of you are, and I think the nuances might be lost on me, but I would probably check out Reddit at the very least.
It's true, although the Reddit around Serial has basically collapsed in the last few weeks. Not sure if you've been following that, but that's something that I'm hoping to talk about in a special bonus episode that we might record next week. We will see. Kevin, how about you? Do you have any sense of a trial? How would you feel if Adnan got a new trial?
Oh, it would be, media-wise, it'd be very OJ-esque. Just based on the fact that there was so much media attention ahead of time because of the podcast, it's definitely going to be on all of the daytime news programs. It would be, I think we probably would be doing this podcast 5 times a week if that were to occur. But it definitely would. It would be covered very heavily in the media, and I wonder to what extent either the prosecution or defense would feel about that, and whether they'd try to go with no cameras in the courtroom if they could.
I think it would be both interesting and appalling to see how people like Nancy Grace would be dealing with this now that it's sort of happening in real time. Watching The Staircase, you see a little bit of, the effect that her in particular has on sort of the morale of the people who are around a case and the way she kind of presents things, and that was absent from all that during Serial. It was absent, and we'll talk about The Staircase in a second, but I think that what's really striking about the media around cases now is that very much like politics, there are pundits who have taken a side, and I think we do see that in The Staircase. I think we've seen that in other sort of media coverage of other cases that, this is the person who's, pro-innocence, and this is the person who's pro-guilt, and I'm, always thinking like,
I'm pro a new trial. I feel like this was a bad trial, and I certainly have feelings about whether Adnan's innocent or guilty. I think I've tipped my hand there, but I really, really think a new trial is something that is necessary no matter what. And where, like, that voice seems to be missing. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the major networks have a justice correspondent who, can really sort of pull apart what is happening with the process. And I think that's really important. And they could, sort of give a somewhat neutral analysis of what happened in court that day, what the testimony means. But you're right. I mean, certainly on the cable news shows, you often have characters, and maybe I shouldn't call them characters, I'm probably not journalists, but characters who do advocate for one side or another. They play a role, and I guess they go with what they think the audience wants to hear. They always want the bad guy to get his.
Right.
And so they push that narrative, and that's, kind of what pushed some of these high-profile documentaries, Serial among them, is that, you have a certain bent on not just following what happens with the court case or with the criminal investigation, but you're emotionally invested in the defendant.
Well, originally Adnan's brief was going to be filed today. That didn't happen. The deadline was delayed another week. After that is filed, there's a good chance I might be speaking with some folks close to the case. If I get that chance, I will certainly loop you all in. And then in that episode, maybe we'll catch up on the latest with the former Intercept journalists, Natasha Vargas Cooper and Ken Silverstein, and their antics, the collapse of the once vibrant Reddit community around Serial, our friend Kevin Urich's television interview no-show. But for now, I want to make a transition. The things we were hoping to touch on, but one of them has pretty much hijacked, I think, all of our brains this morning. That is Andrew Jarecki's 6-part HBO docudrama, The Jinx. It aired its final episode of 6 last night. Anyone who's listening to this, I put a disclaimer in the beginning, so if you haven't watched it, Jarecki in 2010 made a film called All Good Things. It was inspired by this real-life case about Robert Durst. After that film, Durst contacted Jarecki, offered him an interview, and this turned into the 6-part documentary. We're also going to be talking about The Staircase. That's a 2004 documentary that's been getting a lot of play lately for a few reasons. I think, Laura, you haven't finished The Staircase.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So it has 8 episodes. Another one which was made later. It's remarkable for a variety of reasons. That is about the murder trial of novelist Michael Peterson, whose wife Kathleen died in 2001. It was directed by a French film team led by Jean-Xavier Lestrade. So I want to bring The Staircase and Jinx back into Serial for a minute. I want you to talk, Laura, about your take on the storytelling of those projects. How they compare, how they don't compare with what Sarah Koenig did in Serial. Did you make any ties there, or were they just very different for you?
They were somewhat different in that I felt like, obviously, with The Staircase, we had direct access to the entire family, to the defense team. And with Jinx, it was more, I felt, told sort of out of chronological order. The way I looked at it was sort of looking at it as who was the narrator and sort of this concept of a reliable versus an unreliable narrator. And so I was looking at Robert Durst, and he gives just enough of the truth to make you want to think he might be telling the truth by saying things, I didn't kill my neighbor, but I did dismember him, and things like that to sort of draw you along into believing his story. So I looked at it as these characters as narrators, and whether I found them credible or not, and also, how their story was parceled out by the directors, which also played into that.
Right. Well, Toby, you sent me a note, and to be fair, this was before the finale last night, before we heard about Durst's arrest. You said that you thought Serial was more successful at provoking conversation when some of these other true crime pieces weren't. Why is that?
That's a good question. I mean, in some ways, I felt like, and I guess I still feel like, that Jinx was, it was very packaged. One of the things with Serial being sort of a week to week, and, she was gaining new information as we went along, is that you're constantly left in these situations where, there were things that were there to debate, and you had a strong feeling that nobody actually had the answer. Like, you're mostly talking about opinions, and you weren't going to tune in next week to Serial and be like, oh, well, here's the real answer, and then somebody's right and somebody's wrong. It seemed like these things were really sort of in play, whereas with Jinx, after last night, my opinion, I guess, is a little less strong, but it seemed as though he was more in control of his material. Like, he had all the material. When the first episode was out, all the material was already there. So you got the feeling that questions that he was going to ask were probably going to be answered at some point. And Staircase, I felt like Staircase was a lot more like Serial in that it seemed like there was a lot of things to talk about, and there were so many sort of crazy plot shifts that seemed wildly improbable that I think that had quite a bit of room for discussion. In the end, I kind of came out of sort of experiencing all three of these with more respect for Sarah's sort of storytelling technique, in that I think she ended up with less sort of bombast that she had to deal with, and still made it, I think, the most compelling of the three series.
The Staircase was a very straight documentary, Kevin. There was no narration. There was very little production in terms of like music and added elements. There were no like anvils dropping from the sky. This is going to be important later kind of stuff. There was no signposting. At no point during the Staircase did someone say to you, the viewer, this is going to be important later. Watch.
There's no reenactments.
No reenactments. Right. It was just footage, interview footage. I know that you loved The Staircase. I'm curious as to what you thought of that form versus Jinx, which was highly produced, very stylized, awesome theme song, as we heard a couple minutes ago, reenactments, graphic design. What did you think about this, the effectiveness of those two forms?
I thought for both Serial and The Staircase, I was surprised at how emotionally invested I was in the defendant. Mm-hmm. And, for somebody who writes true crime and the narrative arc is usually that there is a bad guy and we're going to find out why he or she did it, I think the stakes are so much higher now. I believe this now. The stakes are so much higher now when you believe that you have somebody who is innocent and is facing time behind bars. And Laura said this in a previous podcast that she's experienced this, that there's no worse feeling than you've got a defendant who you just know is innocent, and the pressure is on. And so to watch the end of episode 8 of The Staircase, which is devastating, and it's like I didn't want to watch episodes 9 and 10 after that, but I did, of course. Another point I just want to point out that Laura made that I thought was great was this idea about the unreliable narrator, and we've seen this in a lot of great fiction, like Fight Club, or The Sixth Sense, and in nonfiction, in drama, it's really interesting because, like Robert Durst says, nobody tells all the truth all the time. And so you really don't know if Michael Peterson from The Staircase is on the level all the time. You don't know about Robert Durst if he's on the level all the time.
I'm curious to know what you, Laura, and Toby thought about Michael Peterson. If you're listening to the podcast, you haven't watched The Staircase, there's a big twist that kind of comes, I think it's in the second or third episode, where Michael Peterson has been arrested for his beloved wife's murder. It's like very clear to the viewer immediately that these two are very much in love. All the kids say that. Everybody who knows them says that. And then you find out that he's a bisexual. And the question sort of surrounding his case is this a secret that he kept from his wife, Kathleen? Was this the motive? Did she discover it? Is that why he had to kill her? And that sort of becomes like the heart, I think, of the prosecution's case, whether or not he's believable, whether or not he's telling the truth. That and another death, which happened years before, that people thought he may have had involvement with. I'm curious as to what you guys thought of Michael Peterson, as the potential murderer. I mean, Laura, you're still in the middle of the series. Where are you on Peterson right now?
I have to say, I waver back and forth on Peterson. I actually like Robert Durst better than I like Michael Peterson.
I'd like you to talk about that a little bit.
There's something oddly charming and eccentric about Durst that, I know he's probably a serial killer, but at the same time, I find myself feeling badly for him. Whereas with Michael Peterson, I'm still really trying to get a read on him. In some episodes, I think he lays it on so thick. He's so dramatic with the crying all the time and the pacing around with his pipe. And I haven't really come to believe in him yet. I did read up about the owl theory today, and that did change my tune a little bit. But as far as how he's being presented in this show, he's not really got me convinced yet.
Right. So a little more about the owl theory. If you're interested in getting an update on the Michael Peterson case, listen to the first episode of a great podcast called Criminal. It is actually about this case and a new theory which has been floated in the last couple of years that Michael Peterson's wife, Kathleen, really died because of wounds from an attack from an owl. I told you there were going to be spoilers in this podcast. Do not complain about my having just said that.
It's your own fault.
No, it's Toby's fault for spoiling True Detective so many episodes ago.
You kind listener, it's your own fault if you've been spoiled.
There should be the statute of limitations on spoilers. The Staircase came out in 2004. I think the statute of limitations is passed on that.
But nobody even heard of it until like 2 months ago.
Okay, Toby. So we just heard Laura say that she had some affection for Robert Durst. I'll admit it, there were moments I did too. I think he delivered the best piece of dialogue in the entire series when he is asked, does he know why his brother Doug has hired a bodyguard? And what does he say, Kevin?
Because my brother's a pussy.
Toby, did you find Durst at all compelling as a person, as a character?
He was definitely compelling. I mean, he just seemed to me very damaged. It was hard not to see him as, at some point in his life, being more of a victim than a perpetrator. And then, of course, that changed. It just seemed like there was a lot of stuff going on with him. Like, it seemed at times he sort of desperately wanted to get caught. At other times he was, desperately trying to get out of whatever he'd gotten himself into. But, shoplifting a sandwich from Wegmans, saying, okay, you can do a multi-million-dollar documentary on me when he, I guess, would know that he's guilty. It just seems like there's a big sign out there saying, catch me.
Well, here's the question, because I also found myself very sympathetic about the way his family treated him and ostracized him. But I kind of wondered at the end, is it a chicken or egg scenario? Was he crazy and that's why his family ostracized him, or did he become crazy because his family marginalized and ostracized him? What do you think?
I would guess it was more his family's effect upon him, and I think seeing his mother die was probably, I don't want to be a pop psychologist, but I didn't like the way they used reenactments in this. I thought the only one that had any way that you could really say there was a justification for it was when they show the mother fall, and you sort of get this sort of visceral sense of how horrific it would be to be however old he was and see your mother die. So I don't think that can happen to a young kid without there being some lasting effect. And then sort of being ostracized on top of that, I would imagine it leads to a sense of victimhood.
But here's the thing, Toby, and I'm going to ask you what you think about this, Kevin. We got that reenactment from Durst's story about what happened. And
Which is so weird.
We both thought that was a very strange telling of that story, right?
Yeah, talk about unreliable narrator. The way he told it in the interview was that in the middle of the night, his father gets him and says, "Come look at mommy." And it takes him to the window and it's like, "Hey, there's mommy on the roof. Now watch her jump." That was that's really
strange.
Peculiar. We talk about who do we like out of these three defendants, and certainly the jury in Galveston thought Robert Durst was charming.
That was the Texas jury acquits an East Coast gajillionaire of a murder that he admits committing.
Yeah. Well, that New York media is coming to get him. So that was probably, what drove him to just dismembering. Michael Peterson is peculiar. But hey, we're four writers here, so who the hell are we to talk? There's a writer there that's a little weird, okay? But Adnan, I think, is obviously the most sympathetic of the three defendants that we look at. We've got just as much time, with Adnan as we did with Michael Peterson, and we definitely thought that, I think all of us think that maybe he is perhaps the most human. One last thing on Durst, which didn't come up in the Jinx but was part of his defense in Galveston, is that his attorney said that Durst has Asperger's. Now, if you look at his behavior and his blinking and sort of the way that he talks, a lot of people are trying to figure out, is he crazy for doing that? If you look at through the lens that he may be on the autism spectrum, maybe some of those behaviors seem to fit a different kind of narrative. Certainly it isn't an excuse for any sort of murder, but just sort of the twitching thing where you're like, this guy's really weird. That might be...
The blinking?
The blinking and the way,
the burping?
and the hands and the, and also being very just sort of straightforward. And he's like, well, I mean, the quote about nobody tells people the truth all the time. And when he's showing them the handwriting samples, and it's like, the police would say this and that. The way he says that is a little Rain Man like. He is saying the thing that out loud that, you're thinking.
Well, I wanted to ask Laura a question, because I think that you were struck by something that sort of differed between these three presentations of crime stories. In Jinx, there were sort of some surprising points of access to people close to the case that deviated. At the beginning of the series, it was just the very typical, friends of the victims talking, saying she was a wonderful person, we want justice. But then you sort of got, the cops in Texas, and then you got, the stepson of one of the victims. And then you sort of started seeing a little bit more access as the series progressed. I think in Serial, the access was really limited to whomever chose to participate. But in The Staircase, the access was, every episode, every scene where we sort of saw someone else talking, they got it all. What did you think of that when you saw that, Laura? They had the jury on film. They were talking to the prosecutors. They were talking to the family. They were in the strategy meetings with the defense team. When you saw that unfolding, in your work in defense, what did you think of all that?
I was just absolutely astounded at the amount of access. Obviously, he must have signed some sort of disclosure agreement early on in the case, and I was surprised that his attorneys would have been comfortable with that, even given that he must have had to sign some sort of a release giving permission for the film crew to be there. It did strike me as a little bit, I don't want to say suspicious, but curious that a French film crew arrives on scene soon after this case is breaking, gets instant access to all of these people. For me, I really enjoyed watching it. I have to say, I give a shout out to the fact that there was a defense investigator. But it was, I think, for people that haven't been inside that part of the criminal justice system like I have been, really eye-opening to see that regardless of the crime and the charges that the people are facing, this is a real person and he has a real life and a real family. And I think it really helped show that it's not as black and white as people might initially think if they're seeing something on TV. But I still am very curious as to how this film crew heard about this case and how they got that level of access.
There were allegations of trial / prosecutorial / evidentiary, presentation in the courtroom misconduct, and it actually is what ended up leading Peterson to get his appeal. That is something that the Peterson case and Adnan's case have in common. And Toby, you sent me a note earlier about documentaries now functioning as extrajudicial appeals. You're talking about Paradise Lost, The Thin Blue Line, Serial. Do you think that now when people are going into these projects, they're thinking that rather than just looking at the process and maybe what went wrong here, they're thinking something has to come of this? Yeah,
I think if they want to have a really successful one, they do. Mm-hmm. I think if they didn't have the payoff in Jinx, do you think HBO would have promoted it to the extent it did and really made it sort of a centerpiece of their season if it had ended up more like Serial? Well, it's kind of hard to tell. He's kind of a crazy old guy, and it seems like he did, but maybe he didn't. I don't think it would have been pushed so hard. So it might go back to Hoop Dreams, where they started following two young basketball players, and then the way their stories kind of diverged was so compelling, and I think they kind of lucked out in some ways. But that kind of set the standard for these kind of following cases or people's lives or whatever, in that if there isn't some kind of epiphany or some kind of reversal of fortune or something, that what you have might be nice, but I don't know if it's palatable to a broad audience.
Have either you or Toby or Laura, have you had anybody, have you interacted with anybody who was interested in adapting any of your work for a film, a television movie, or a movie or anything like that?
I have.
Yeah, I know you have.
We have.
Yeah, I mean, I
haven't.
I haven't. Well, the thing that I think is interesting is that's the question they always have is, do you have something that no one knows? And I think that sort of plays into the ethical questions.
Yes, it's in the book.
But the thing, Laura, here's the thing that I really found interesting about the Jinx, because the first 3 episodes, and I think we talked a little bit about this about email, whether or not we were going to talk about it. The first 3 episodes sort of like very conventional true crime storytelling. Yes, they had Durst, and that was interesting. And then I was halfway through, and I thought, well, I may as well finish this. The 5th episode, a huge revelation, new evidence. The 6th episode, the final episode, totally broke format. The crew turned the camera on themselves. You saw Jarecki being nervous about questioning. It was a huge format break. It ended up being, to me, very suspenseful. Laura, did you like the format break? Do you think it worked? Do you think it was a very solid way to sort of end things? Or is that something that you would like to have seen earlier in the series? I'm just curious to know what your thoughts about the storytelling format, the way they did that arc.
For me, it actually really worked. I was quite surprised. Like you, I was kind of watching along in the beginning of this, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I could go either way on this series. You know, I'm fascinated by Durst. I want to psychoanalyze him and figure out why he is the way he is. But I have to tell you, when I was watching the last episode of this show, I started to get butterflies, like legitimate butterflies, as I was watching them discuss how they were going to slip the envelope into the photos and when they were going to ask him. And as I sat there waiting for it to happen, I really was quite nervous. And then when he went in the bathroom, I think I actually yelled out and woke up everybody in my house because it was just so unexpected.
Well, it was unexpected. And I related to Jarecki in those scenes because, you know, when Kevin and I write books together, he's been a reporter for a long time. I have not. And when I'm put in a difficult position where I have to talk to somebody and I think it's going to make me uncomfortable, I do exactly what Jarecki did, right, Kevin? I'm like, hey, can we rehearse this? Like,
yeah, well, I do that too. I mean, those aren't always easy.
Yep.
The toughest thing usually is approaching, you know, the family of someone who's lost somebody or something. It's something uncomfortable like that. Or you're right, you know, sitting down and let's talk to you about the thing that you did. So that's difficult to do. You know, what I thought here about Serial versus Jinx was, you know, the expectation of the audience.
Right.
And, you know, with Serial, you know, Sarah Koenig says, you know, we're going to look into this. And although she never says this explicitly, the audience is left with the idea that at the end of these episodes, something is going to happen. You know, there's going to be the smoking gun and Adnan will be exonerated or, you know, definitely put away. And so the ambiguity was something that a lot of people talked about with Serial. Now with Jinx, it really started off looking like your typical stylized biopic. And I don't think anyone had any expectations that this was a hard-hitting interview piece or a hard-hitting investigation. And I definitely don't think that these filmmakers went into this with saying, we're going to get him now that he's calling it. You know, it was just he was out of the blue. You're doing this movie. I want to sit down and talk. They thought this would be a great, you know, next thing to do. So the idea that at the very end you have this moment where they blow it wide open is just so unexpected. It is the opposite expectation. I should say, you got to the end of episode 5, and they come up with this matching, you know, the handwriting, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what is going to happen in this last episode? The difference there is that you were expecting one thing, and you got the other, and it was, you know, here are the two opposite cases. I really think the Jinx is the Frost Nixon of true crime documentaries. I'm just saying the unexpectedness of the one big takeaway line. We just never saw that coming.
You think it is right now, but there are questions about how it was done. I don't know. They might change your mind. Toby, before we get to the questions part, can you just tell me sort of how you reacted in that moment when Durst went into the bathroom and we heard him having that dialogue? Were you on the edge of your seat?
Oh, yeah. No, I thought it was great. The last episode, I kind of wish the rest of it had been more like that, quite honestly, because the rest of it I kind of felt was extremely conventional. You know, I think part of what Serial did very well was kind of raise the curtain a little bit on the process. I think it would have been better to see a little bit more of his process. I mean, because it's very slick.
Yeah.
Basically, almost the entire rest of the thing. But it's also, you know, it was interesting in that it played out sort of like a fiction movie in that earlier, like I don't know if it was the second episode or third episode, he's got the hot mic and he's rehearsing how he's going to say the next line when they go back to the interview. And so it's almost like they kind of set it up there.
Yeah, that was an anvil that we now can realize and look back on. That's why they did that.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder, when they started this, was it just going to be like a 2-hour thing kind of following up on this movie they made? And then when they got this, it was like, okay, well, we can definitely turn this into a 6-hour event.
Something someone will buy, like HBO.
Right.
Right. Well, he does make a journey, I think. He's sort of like filmmaker. We discovered last night he co-wrote the theme song from Felicity, a friend of J.J. Abrams. He can become sort of an unwitting documentarian. And then in the series, we see him becoming a sleuth and then maybe playing journalist at the end. Kevin, it's like you're dying to say something.
No, I just, talking about these three as procedurals. Serial was a reporter's procedural. We watched Sarah do her work. The Staircase is a lawyer's procedural, primarily a defense lawyer's procedural, and they pulled the curtain back on that. With the Jinx, it wasn't really either until the very end. One of the rules of writing is to do something unexpected.
Right.
Your character should do something unexpected. And so the break of format and the idea that, oh, shit, we might actually have something here. I think even going into episode 6, and you're thinking, hey, it's going to be about the handwriting, and it was kind of a letdown. He just kind of went, and then to have this moment that they say they found months and months later.
All right, well, let's just talk about that. We have to get it out there. Big difference between Serial and the Jinx. Serial was being produced in real time. If Sarah discovered something and then she vetted it, we learned about it. This movie has been in production for years, and there's a lot on the web today about the timeline and how the timeline was manipulated in the series. The most stunning thing, it's a combination, I think, of a New York Times piece and a Gawker piece, that interview with Robert Durst that we saw at the end actually took place a full year before he was arrested for stalking his brother. The timeline was manipulated, which means that this filmmaker had in his hands evidence in a murder case for at least 2 years. Now, Laura, let's just pretend for a second that Jarecki is a reporter, not a filmmaker, not a documentarian. Let's just pretend he is just a journalist. Where do you stand on the, I know this guy murdered 3 people, I have evidence that looks like it proves it. What do you do?
I have to say, I've been in a situation as a journalist where people wanted my notebooks or my notes or my material. And what I was always taught to do was not to turn over my materials to the police or the prosecutors. We are independent. We are journalists. We are not agents of the police. And it's not necessarily even just the police. It's anybody that might want your notebooks. I was subpoenaed to federal court in Boston once to testify on behalf of OSHA based on some photos that I had taken of something that was going on. And my newspaper fought that subpoena, and they fought me testifying. They very clearly made the point that, it was not my job to prove their case. And so obviously, Jarecki is not a journalist by profession. He's a documentary maker, and he doesn't come from that background. But I wouldn't have turned it over, even though I know ethically, morally, you might feel like you should. They can read your story.
What do you think, Toby? When you sort of think about how this played out, Jarecki had this evidence. Jarecki claims he discovered this audio months later. I will tell you, as somebody who produces radio and somebody who's been on a bunch of true crime documentary TV shows, that the audio is always rolling, and they're looking at the waveform the whole time. Someone's looking at that monitor. If he was talking in the bathroom, it's hard to believe that they discovered it months later, for me, is what I'm saying. But who knows if that's true or not. But Toby, I'm just curious to know, where do you land on the ethics of all this?
Well, I guess I agree with Laura in that with him not being a journalist, I think it changes things a little bit. I don't think he had sources he had to protect in this instance, since it was just audio of Durst. So I don't know Jarecki. I don't know much about him. My sense from watching it was that if he held on to it, it was so that he could have it for his bombastic, his show.
To be able to sell the documentary to HBO. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm sure he had his fingers crossed that Durst wouldn't go and kill somebody else in the meantime.
That's the question. This is somebody we know his brother had a restraining order against him when he violated it. We know that he very likely killed 3 people. Does that change the picture for you at all? What do you think, Kevin?
Well, there's just a lot of talk on the internet of a likely story that, the timing of the arrest and the fact that, they said they found this little bit later. He may be a documentarian. He may not be a journalist by trade, but the First Amendment still applies to him, and the protections that the First Amendment supplies to journalists still apply to him. I would have just not told anybody and ran it. Mm-hmm. They took that letter and they stuck it in a safety deposit box. One, they didn't want anyone breaking in to get it. I think they seemed to realize what they had. The fact that you could not hear the sound with the video is that when they're doing multi-camera like that, they're not recording the sound on the visual, on the video part of the tape, because they're dealing with multiple cameras. Mm-hmm. That sound guy is running something completely different, which is why they sync up. It's why they have that clapboard.
Yep.
So, so it's not a digital. It's very much a pouch with a VU meter and some stuff in it, and they just go. So all the video cameras could be off, and the sound could still be running.
Right? No,
and that's
I know
what they
that.
say.
Yes.
And I think I have no reason to doubt that.
Right.
Should they have turned it over at some point? I guess they did. I wouldn't have. I would have just gone with it, because by the end of episode 5, if you're a detective and this is your case, you better be watching all these episodes. You don't want, hey, Bob, the interesting thing about last night in that episode, what? Oh, the case that I'm working on for the past 10 years? Oh, I missed it. Yeah. I DVR'd it. I'll get to it on Wednesday.
Certainly. He says he worked with the police since 2013, so it undermines this idea that the police got onto it because of the
timing of when he does that is extremely important. Yes. Because as soon as they do that, they can be considered as acting as agents of the state, as agents of law enforcement. Then that changes the admissibility of any of that evidence.
I just want to throw out a quick anecdote. Right before we came in to tape this, I was in the newsroom. I was talking to our news director and our senior reporter here and posed this exact question to them. News director, who I admire and respect, said, you know what? If I knew he'd killed 3 people and could kill more, I think I may have to work with a cannon over the cops. The senior reporter, who I also admire very much, said, no way. I would lock it down, and the police could learn about it when I wrote my story. So I guess that there's, it's not, I think there's no golden rule, right? I mean, it's just sort of, and this is what he decided to do. And apparently now he's not talking right now. So I guess we won't find out for a while what actually happened. So one last question about this, and then I just want to go to one final thing before we wrap up. Laura, you and I have talked about the fact that we love the journey. Satisfying ending is not as important. But man, this would have a satisfying ending, or what? Are you swayed at all? Do you now think that the ending is a little more important than you thought it was? Or would you have been okay with the whole series having been as good as episode 6 and then gotten nothing out of it? What's your take on that?
I think for me, this ending just totally made this series, like Toby was saying before. I was struck by how satisfying this ending was. I was talking about it with people at work this morning. In the beginning, it was almost, I said, this is almost just too good of an ending. It almost didn't seem like it could be possible to me, more like it was, fiction, the way that it all played out over the weekend with his arrest on Saturday, and then, neatly wrapped up with a bow with that last line in the bathroom. It really made the series for me. I do enjoy the journey. I am really enjoying the journey of going along with the defense team in The Staircase. They have resources that I didn't used to have when I did
millions
that kind of
of resources,
with experts and things like that. But as for the Jinx, the satisfying ending made the entire series for me.
What do you think, Toby?
I think if you're not going to have a satisfying ending, the journey's got to be really, really good. And I thought Serial was that. I don't think the Jinx was good enough to be good without having a great ending, which it did. So, I think that really saved it.
And Kevin?
I thought that the Jinx would still have been a very good miniseries, even without that fantastic ending. The whole Durst story is it's big in New York and it's big in Los Angeles, but it's actually a local story there. There's not a lot of people in between the two coasts who know the Durst story, as juicy as it is. And so for me, I'm like, oh, this is a really interesting story. How come I never knew this before? It was great to kind of hear it in his words. And in my own mind, I'm thinking the last episode is going to be one of those, he walks off into the sunset and we'll just never know about this creepy guy. I was blown away. So even if it had ended there, I still would have said, hey, that's great. I wouldn't say it's the Frost Nixon of true crime biopics, but
you did say that earlier.
I did. I wouldn't have said it.
Oh, okay.
If if it was just that.
Right.
If it ended at episode 4 or midway through episode 5, but the unexpected, powerful nature of the way it ended. And the fact that it also, the real-time aspect here, kind of like Serial, was that he was arrested within hours of that last episode playing. And I guess the reason why he left Houston and was sort of milling around New Orleans is that people saw the end of episode 5, and now they were interested in finding him to interview him. What's his reaction? He was sort of, pushed out of his his relative comfort for the past 2 years since giving the interview, and now he's, thinking about getting on the run.
Yeah, maybe going to fake Madrid all over again.
Maybe Barcelona.
Do you ever meet someone who seems kind of off? Whether it's a creepy neighbor or random phone number that keeps calling you, Truthfinder has you covered. You can search for people by name, address, phone number, email, and more. Truthfinder can be especially helpful for running confidential background checks on anyone you're planning to meet from online dating apps. Go to truthfinder.com/podcasts for a special offer. That's truthfinder.com/podcasts to access your special offer today.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
Okay, so before we wrap up, a little feature that I'm hoping you'll all grow to love. I want each of your 20-second reaction to what I'm going to throw out at you. It is time for the crime of the week. The biggest crime, arguably, in New Hampshire history, at least media-wise, was the Pam Smart case, the first televised trial, sensational trial. This week, huge news in that case. Billy Flynn, the shooter in the Pam Smart case, was released on parole. The parole board said he'd been a model prisoner for all the time he's been in prison. I would like each of you, in a sentence or two, about 20 seconds or so, give me reaction to Billy Flynn's parole. Do you think Pam Smart got a fair trial? Does it matter to you? Toby, go.
I was not living in New Hampshire at the time. I don't know a whole lot about it. I saw the movie with Nicole Kidman. I think he was like 18 when he was put away, and he's been away for how long?
Like 25 years.
So
yeah.
He spent more than half his life after being manipulated by an adult as a teenager. I mean, I think it's probably good that he's out.
Okay, Laura, what do you think? You were a Seacoast person. You probably, I don't know what your proximity was to this case when it was all going, but Billy Flynn paroled in the Pam Smart murder. What do you think?
I say good for him. Like Toby said, I did feel sympathy for him. I mean, he is obviously young and impressionable, and that picture of Pam in her little lingerie was going around the internet last week after his parole board hearing. She clearly manipulated him, and obviously, yes, there was a murder, and he did something he should not have done. But it's time for him to have another chance. And, I think that, Pam is probably where she should be. But it's a case that continues to fascinate people. And I'll be curious to hear what happens now that he's out, if there's going to be some interviews with him.
Kevin, what do you think? Did Billy Flynn get paroled? Is that a good thing, bad thing? Did Pam Smart get a fair trial? What do you think?
Well, I got to go pick up my cousin at the prison, I guess. No, actually, Billy Flynn is not related to Kevin Flynn. Yeah, okay. In my opinion, if he truly is a model prisoner, he served 25 years. That seems to be a fair debt to society. I think then parole is probably appropriate here. Those people who have watched Captivated, the trials of Pamela Smart, another HBO biopic.
A really fun documentary.
Completely different than the Jinx. There are people, those filmmakers make the case that Pam didn't get a fair trial. They point to a lot of the media hype around it. I will say that I think that in this country, you are entitled to a fair trial. You are not entitled to a perfect trial. And I think although there was some sort of a media circus, it was actually outside the courtroom. Talk to any New Hampshire reporter who is there.
That's
it wasn't,
more than 20 seconds.
It wasn't in the courtroom. It was the hallway where she would come in and out. The jurors never saw that. They heard click, click, click from still cameras. You hear that in every trial. trial these days. I do not believe that Pam got an unfair trial. She's in jail where she belongs.
But as Toby said, all he knows about the case he learned from watching the movie with Nicole Kidman, and that was the point that documentary made, is that the public, there was a mix-up between fiction and reality that did work its way into the courtroom.
All I know about the Lindbergh case is what I've seen on TV.
Okay, I guess we will end it there. Laura Bricker is a former reporter, true crime writer. Toby Ball is a crime fiction writer, noir author. Thank you both so much for taking some time out of your busy day to chat with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Kevin, thank you so much as always.
We're going to continue this when we get home, Rebecca.
Partners in Crime Media.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.